Hi, I'm Anthony Originello, CEO of the Chartered Professionals in Human Resources for BC and Yukon. We represent more than 8,000 members, and as the organization dedicated to advancing the HR profession through education, advocacy, awareness, professional development, as well as our recognized and impactful CPHR designation, we are proud to be a sponsor of this show. We have been the voice of the HR profession since 1942. Learn more about us at cphrbc.ca.
In this edition of Careers That Matter, I'm joined by Dr. Lenore Newman, who heads up the Faculty of Science, especially in the ag tech sector out of the University of Fraser Valley. Lenore, welcome.
Glad to be here.
I suggested that you're with the University of Fraser Valley, but that's kind of like your home base. What exactly does your job look like these days?
I like to say I have a great job and a somewhat strange job. So I am director of the Food and Agriculture Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley, which leads projects in the valley and all over the country in food innovation and agricultural technology innovation. And so I have a team of people who are doing things in controlled environment agriculture, precision fermentation, and also in policy landscapes and building networks. So that's half my job. The other half is I'm advisor to the provost on agricultural direction for the university and building out major projects. And for University of the Fraser Valley, we're in an interesting position as universities go. You may know it's tough times in the sector, but we're experiencing a lot of growth and a lot of interest. And how we've done that is by really owning our mandate and saying, we're the University of the Fraser Valley. We serve this region. We do the research and engagement with industry that the big universities don't do and can't do. And among other things, we're in the black, which is very rare for a university these days. And we're growing. And that's our goal, is to really double down on these critical local areas. So that's the day job.
Yeah, but then there's more. Tell us about the more.
Oh, and then there's more. So yeah, I'm a little strange in that I have feet in multiple camps. And so in the past, as you know, I've assisted government on both the minister's committee to revise the ALR, and then later on the premier's task force, where I served at the pleasure of John Horgan. And that was really eye-opening for me, a very interesting experience. But I also do have a foot on the industrial side, and I mentor for Creative Destruction Labs Rockies out of University of Calgary for their agriculture innovation program. And I do a lot of private mentorship, often called on by venture capitalists and entrepreneurs to assist them with either the technology side of things or the policy side. I'm known for trying to untangle red tape, as it were, which is a frustrating but kind of a challenge. It's like a puzzle. It's like my equivalent of Sudoku, is how to get these people through these things.
And I know there's more, but what does an average day look like for you? Or is there such a thing as an average day?
There really isn't an average day, and it's funny you asked me this week, because this is a very unaverage week with the threat of tariffs from the Trump government hanging over us. And it really depends what's in the hopper, as it were. So there's the day-to-day where I'm assisting the team with general operations and making sure that our projects are moving forward, and kind of the more mundane side of making sure we're hitting our KPIs and all these things. Then often I am doing fundraising, so I might be talking to a donor or working on a grant application with other people across the country. And or I might be mentoring a startup. So I might be on Zoom talking to someone in another province who's trying to achieve their dream, and I'm giving them what advice I can. And so that's part of it. do like to occasionally get in the field still and get my hands literally dirty, and I do that where I can too.
You do a fair bit of media as well.
I do, and I've always been a storyteller. I come from a family of storytellers. A great passion of mine is the writing side of what I do and the speaking. I don't know, I'm a bit of an extrovert, I guess, and I like communicating messages to people in a way that gets them excited and engaged. I've written, as you might know, a couple of books.
Yes.
3 books.
Dinner on Mars.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah.
Was a fun one. And, of course, Lost Feast, which was a wonderful project looking at extinct foods. I do my occasional radio piece on North by Northwest on food. And I am writing a new book very slowly about how emotionally we engage with food. It's called Cravings. And it's about how humans and food work on not just a scientific level, but also a deeply cultural level.
Okay, let's go back to earlier in your life. Where did you graduate from high school?
Oh, well, to really understand me, you have to go even a little further back. I was born into a fishing family. My family are from Finland originally, and we came to British Columbia to fish, and we ran a fishing company. And so I grew up on boats. My dad mainly fished halibut. We did dabble in some other fisheries as well. And that was my life for a very long time. And eventually when needed to physically be in a place, I grew up in Roberts Creek on the Sunshine Coast, but also on the water. And I always thought that's what I was going to do. I had a great passion for the family business and liked the intricacies of it. And so I kind of grew up in the food industry, and then I did probably the world's craziest detour. And the funny part of it, and my dad loves holding this over me, is I won a full freight scholarship to UBC to do physics.
Physics?
Yes, physics. And I didn't want to take it because, I was in my teens. I didn't want to do this weird thing. And my dad was like, no, this isn't a conversation. You're doing this. And we fought back and forth as we do. And he was finally like, look, try it for a year. And if you hate it, you can come back. It's not like fish are going anywhere. Not like the company and the boats are going anywhere. And I'm like, fine, but I'm not going to like it. Well, Dad was right. And I did like it. And I think in hindsight, the connection between those two things, one of the things I loved about the boats, and we actually built our own boats and maintained them, I loved the intricacies of a halibut boat and how you had to be able to fix anything on the boat at any time because, of course, you're in the middle of the ocean. And so I always had a kind of hands-on sort of a steampunk, as we'd call it now, approach to life. And physics gave me that in that I wasn't very good at the theoretical side, but I was really good at the experimental side. I actually took metalwork courses at UBC, built all my own equipment in my experiments there. And yeah, so that gave me a really great grounding. And I don't regret that physics degree at all. It has served me very well, even though I don't think I've actually done advanced calculus ever since.
Okay, so what happened though? Because you are not a physicist, you're not in physics, you're in the agri-food sector. What next bizarre turn did you take?
Yes, and I like to say, I come from a family of nomads, and when I finished that, I was really young and needed to nomad for a while, and I actually did a lot of travel. I trekked from Moscow to Beijing, across the Trans-Siberian through Mongolia, and took some time because I had no idea what I wanted to do next. Physics is interesting. It's a great base, but there's not a lot of call for going on in it. And I'd kind of had enough university. I really did know my own self at that point. And I sort of did whatever. And a lot of my friends were getting into the startup space, and I had a little bit of experience with companies. So I assisted a little bit and ended up just looking for something. And I'd become quite worried about environment at that point for two reasons. Number one, we were starting to really get an awareness of the impact of big environmental problems. And the one that really sparked that interest in me was the ozone crisis. And that it was scary. It was like, wow, we could seriously have damaged the Earth without even meaning to or knowing it. And at the same time, I was seeing the fisheries fail. And that was a real wake-up call. My family had been fishing for well over a century, and suddenly the fish were going away. And so I decided to go back and do, I think the key element there was I realized we had all the technology we needed to solve these problems. We didn't have the social side, and I knew nothing about it. So I went to Toronto, which was a bit of a wake-up call. It was so cold, and so no ocean. And I moved to Toronto and did environmental studies. And I did a master's, a very applied master's at York University. And it got me very passionate about environment. And 2 years later, I was like, oh no, I have to make a choice again. And I'm still doing that, to be honest. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But I reached a point, and I had a fork in the road that I think was very important for me. I was like, well, I can do a doctorate, or I can do an MBA. And it was sort of the two choices, was the business side or the academic side. And I still am not entirely sure why, but I went down the PhD road. I think I was just really enjoying deeply digging into a problem. I started to bring food back in at that time, because the world was starting to realize that food was something that needed to be studied, that there was a sustainability story there. So I started digging into that. And you're going to notice this story repeats. And so I'm really a bad person to interview if you're looking for people who knew exactly what they wanted to do.
Well, actually, I have found that most people who wind up in complex and interesting careers like yours, they had a meandering path.
Yes, and some of it was so haphazard. And I finished the PhD, once again, no idea what I was going to do next. And by pure fate, and I often think that some of the best things in life are accidental. By pure fate, the person who was supposed to be my external PhD examiner was sick. And instead, a woman named Dr. Ann Dale subbed in. And she had worked with the Privy Council in Ottawa and then moved into academia. And she came and did my examination, and she needed a lift to the train station. And we were like, sure, we'll drive you down. And I was spent by this point because I just defended a PhD. But we're chatting, and she's like, look, I want to offer you a job in Ottawa. And I was like, sure. And I mean, I didn't even know what it entailed. And what it entailed was a postdoctorate position that was deeply politically embedded. And that's where my political chops were sort of whetted. Yeah, and I've been fascinated ever since by how policy is made. And that was such an exciting part. That also eventually got me back to BC because she was with Royal Roads University. And I wanted to come home. My family was getting older. They needed care. And I did what academics never should do. I just moved. And I came back to BC and said, I'm just going to stay here. And I'd been working in bars and restaurants through my doctorate. So I was like, well, worst case scenario, I'll open a restaurant with a friend and we'll just see what fate brings. And once again, as that job came toward an end, a friend said, you should apply to this Canada Research Chair at Fraser Valley. And I'm like, I remember, and I feel so bad about this, but at the time I was like, where's Abbotsford? And where's the University of the Fraser Valley? And of course it was brand new. And I'd loved startups and startup cultures. I still do. It was a startup university, Stu. Do you know how rare those are?
Very.
Very. And I was pretty tired of universities by this point, but I went and I'm like, oh my God, the paint's still wet on this place. this might work. I'll give it a couple of years. Like just like back at the start with my dad.
Wow.
And I put in, but I told them, right? I said, I'm going to apply for a chair we probably won't win because it's going to be strange. And it was food. And it was the first food-related chair to be funded by the government. And the rest is, as they say, history. And over the years, the role has evolved. We built the Institute so we could do more research for the community. It turned out I really loved the Valley. I loved the people there. The politicians, the farmers, the processors. It's an amazing place. I love the students, even though I don't really teach much anymore. I still have them working with my group. It's been a wonderful career, totally accidental. And I think my only advice to young people is when you're young, take the leap, because you always do something else later. But if you get something where you're like, I do not know how this will go, every time I've made that leap, it's turned out well.
So what do you think about yourself that made you say, okay, I have the courage to take the leap?
You know, in a way, maybe growing up a fisherman's daughter and being, on boats. And I grew up in a deeply entrepreneurial environment. And, when I tell the stories, it sometimes sounds folksy, but it was a hard industry. It was physically hard. It was financially very hard. My dad built a halibut boat in the 1980s and had loans at like 20%. And it was, skin of our teeth survival during that time. There was always something going wrong, and but it got me interested in some of those, like taking a risk for a reward, understanding commodities prices and how they impact you on a day-to-day basis. Because we literally unloaded fish at the place we could get the best price and waved goodbye to them as they sailed off into the global system.
Yeah.
And so to me, I think I've always been a traveler, a nomad, a risk taker, and I grew up with, I think, a couple of things really critical. And critical people for me, my grandfather, my grandmother, my father, they were really clear that I could do anything in life that I wanted as long as I had the courage to do it, and that I only got one go, and so to make it count. And that's always, every time I'm terrified, it's in the back of my head that you get one go. And so what's the worst that can happen, really? And so I've tried to live that truth, and it's not always been popular, as you know, with governments, and academics don't always like it, but I like to say I'm an acquired taste. But I feel I've moved the needle a bit, and hopefully in my remaining time, however I do it, and like I said, still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. But for now, the next 5 years, I'm going to run this national network with a close friend, and hopefully continue to move that needle a bit. Because I really think it's all that any of us can do individually is just do our little part, try and close out the noise from social media and the horrible things in the world, and try and make a little corner better.
Well, thank you for giving us a glimpse into your career and your career path.
Oh, most welcome, man. It's been an adventure, and what more can you ask for?
Not much. Thanks.